So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Brain Food in Conversation with. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. I can see some audios connecting, which is great. So lovely to see so many of you on today's call. I'm really excited to have this session this morning. So welcome, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name's Hayden Bratt, and I'm one of the founders of Brain Food. And we've got quite a few new people to Brain Food today, so welcome to all those who are joining Brain Food for the first time. And there's also some familiar faces, so welcome back to all of those who've been on previous Brain Food events or activities. So lovely to see you all again. You are all on mute, and what we'd ask you throughout this call, we do want it to make it interactive. So if you would like to interact with myself or the guests, then please use our chat function, which you can, and I'll be monitoring that throughout the call this morning. So for those who don't know about Brain Food is a community that we set up about a year ago, aimed at people who are passionate about learning and development and people development. And we kind of live under three kind of strap lines or headings, which is about community. So hence why we're doing this conversation today. And I guess in our lovely world of social distancing and isolation, then community is ever more important. So we're really glad that so many of you are on this call today. So that's our first kind of part. Second is about curiosity. How do we kind of discover and learn and grow together? And the third is inspiration. So we really hope that today's conversation, and I have absolutely no doubts that today's conversation with Perry is going to fill you with some ideas and thoughts, and definitely some inspiration to take away into your own practice as learning professionals. So today's call is going to be hosted by our very own Genevieve Dick. So Genevieve is one of our founders of Brain Food. So good morning, Genevieve.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Brain Food.
So Jen's going to be taking us through and leading the discussion, and I'd really be really grateful and really privileged to welcome Perry to today's call. So Perry, nice to see you.
Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Perry. For those who don't know, Perry is the Chief Energy Officer at PTHR. He's a 2 times TEDx speaker, an award-winning writer and author on books around kind of the future of work. So we're really excited today to have this conversation with Perry and to hear all of his thoughts around this kind of idea of moving and how do we use simulation in learning. So without further ado, I'm going to shut up and stop monitoring the chat, and I will hand you over to Jen, who's going to take us through the session. So good luck, guys, and looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, everyone. Maybe are you off mute? Just want to check. Good. Okay, so our conversation today is around pedagogical instruction into immersive labs. Do you want to break this down for us and explain what it means for L&D?
Yeah, I do. So thank you for the chance to talk about it. It's a fairly new concept, I suppose you'd say. So some people might be going, well, what do we mean about labs? And everybody has an image in their mind of a technician with a white coat, Petri dishes and microscopes and all that kind of stuff. And of course, that is where I guess you'd say some research is going on right now, trying to get us over this horrific disease. So it's not that kind of lab. It's an immersive environment, and it's therefore in the mind's eye, I guess you think about people collecting in a room a little bit like a training course or a workshop. I first came across a simulation at a business school, and it was a reconstruction of the Challenger shuttle disaster, where sadly all the astronauts lost their lives because there were a catalogue of incidents that led to the shuttle blowing up in midair. And so this was intended to put people in under the sort of stressful conditions of that, and stop and pause and ask people to reflect and learn and so on. And I thought to myself, wow, what an incredible situation. But how expensive and probably difficult it was to put that kind of simulation together. I could see the intensity of it. And so I kind of parked the thought. And I guess when I'm talking about an immersive situation, that's exactly it. We find ourselves immersed in heat of the moment things out there. You know, we sort of make it up as we go along kind of thing, on the fly, that sort of thing. And I suppose Josh Bersin would call it learning in the flow of work, wouldn't he? And I'm thinking, well, why do we let people do that? That's high risk, it's high danger, it's high stress. They might be struggling to comprehend the situation. Why can't we recreate that before it happens, so that when they're in the real world, they go, I did this in the lab and this is what happened, and they can use that experience to then, I guess, navigate the real world a little bit better. So that's the concept of it. It's a pretend but incredibly realistic version of what people face in the real world.
Very nice. So you've been in HR and L&D for a good few years now. What sparked your interest into simulated learning?
So there was that recreation that I came across, but I had a flashback to a training course I went on when I was in my 20s, and I was working in the court service, and it was how to do bankruptcy proceedings, because I worked in the court service, and it was a 5-day utter boring fest of working through a manual to consume knowledge. And then I sort of got unleashed on the bankruptcy applying and litigious world when I got back into the real world. And it was the most pathetic learning experience I've ever had, because it did not prepare me for any of the intensity, any of the complexity, any of the challenges at all. It's like, I can't use anything in this folder. And so I flashed back to that, thinking, how could they have recreated it? Well, they didn't need to give me the bloody folder to read in the course for a start. They needed to say, let's pretend it's day one on the bankruptcy desk and simulate what happens. And I would have been so much more capable had they done that. And I suppose it is this scenario of intensity, complexity, and so on, where we have constructed training courses to try and best replicate that real world with exercises and role modeling and scenarios. And they've been pretty good attempts at doing this, but nothing prepared me for that situation. So I had that kind of horrific flashback, and that made me more interested in how could that have been done better. And I think in the L&D world, we've been playing a game of ping pong between immersive e-learning and courses. And then courses seem to disappear and the e-learning doesn't seem to be as effective. So we recreate the courses again. And then we try and blend it out. And then we try and do micro learning. And I'm thinking, well, there's a place for all of that. But I think there are a lot of situations where even if it's a couple of hours, you could simulate in a closed environment what people will face, what they need to know, what they need to do. And I just think the time's come now to start to think very seriously about this kind of immersive learning situation.
So with the situation we're in now, we're all in isolation, how do we make the simulated learning work for us?
Yeah, I mean, it just completely throws into the mix the fact that you cannot co-locate and be, in close proximity to people, doesn't it? But I remember having a conversation with somebody very senior in the petrochemical industry who talked about his commissioning of the to build create a situation that was virtual for people who were new to his industry, so that they could walk through a refinery, they could see what the control desk looked like, they simulated an incident, and so you acted like playing a game. And I think that's where the L&D world got very excited about gamification, because you could see how immersive that was. And of course, now we have VR headsets, it's even more immersive. So I think there's a part to play for that kind of virtual world where you are an avatar within a situation. I still think it's a bit distant from us though. I still think it's like I'm playing as a character. I've got numerous lives. I don't care if I make a mistake. I can just be flippant with it and perhaps switch off some of the cognition that you need to. But I think in a world where we can't be in a room with people like now, then I think we can simulate perhaps in small chunks where we're like, okay, let's pretend that we have all just woken up and there's a disaster in the company. We're all at home. We can't get to the office. What would we do? And you could simulate that by saying, right, okay, let's create this platform to do this. Let's talk about this situation in this kind of conversation. Then let's disperse and go and do some tasks and then come back and play it through. So I still think we can simulate in the virtual world. And I don't think there's anything to stop us from creating scenarios that aren't just disaster recovery. They are potential customer escalation or whatever it is, because you could script people, you could brief them and say, you're the customer, get on the phone, let's all jump in, listen to it and create the situation. So I think we can adapt and I think we can use it. It might not be quite as comforting because you're not in the room, but I think we can recreate a lot of it.
So with that, like, what would make a good simulation?
I mean, it's a classic case of where do you start, really. But I think I'll go to the place where I think a lot of more discerning learning professionals are now going, which is not just to construct a course because they can, but to think, what are the problems that are in my business at a human level, a system level, a product service level, customer level, stakeholder level, whatever it might be, and take that problem and go, have we seen this before? Not quite like this, but similar. And in the insurance industry, I can remember a story about how an organization was trying to leverage its experts. And they found this one person who was literally the walking knowledge for everything to do with admiralty type insurance, so shipping and so on. And so rather than him just create a massive catalogue of these are the procedures, they got him to sit in a room, they got to talk to him as if they were an Admiralty customer and kind of simulated the dialogue that would happen in those kind of queries and claims and so on. And they filmed it and put it on a social network. So it could even be that sort of thing. So I think it's problems, it's about leveraging expertise and experience where people have been through critical incidents or complex scenarios. And in the legal world, of course, you get things like mock tribunals and mock trials. They're a simulation. We're not used to this. So I think you have actors, you have scripts, you have scenarios, but I think it's genuinely, what's the problem? What's the gap we're trying to close? And can that be done in an immersive environment?
So based off that, what is the simulation? What elements does it have to give it value in informal and formal learning environments?
So I guess the topic is obviously where you'd start, really, that problem. And I think you can probably divert attention in two ways to that problem. One is the knowledge that people need to know about the context of the problem, the backstory, the knowledge piece that we would do as part of our instructional design, as part of perhaps part one of a course. So I think we can take that out the simulation and we can say, read this briefing, immerse yourself in this knowledge before you step in the room, because we want you to have at least some computation of that. And then I think when you go into the design stage, then I think you set up a series of events, and perhaps you can use learning pathways about, if they choose this option, this is where it's going to go. So I think you can do some of that game mechanics type thing where you've got pathways and choice dynamics involved in that. And so I think once you've got into that situation, you can then decide, do we need people there for all day, or do we need them there for a couple of hours? And that depends on the complexity and where people start from. So you can still do a bit of a learning needs analysis, although that's a kind of strange concept that I think is coming under challenge, rightly so. But you can say to people, have you ever done this before? Have you ever seen anything like it? And what do you know about it? So they come into it, I think, with a little bit of a preconceived notion of the gap they have to close. And that will help you determine whether it's an hour simulation or whether it's perhaps even over 5 days. Do you know what I mean? You could quite literally reconstruct that sort of thing. And that then gives you the parameters to work in. You choose the right environment, the tools, and so on. And it will take a lot of design and scripting. But my sense is that once you've done that, the play would then be incredibly powerful for them as learners.
Cool. I'm just going to check into the group chat. I've seen some questions come through. We've got one from Emily. How would you see this working when people still need a technical or functional skill to be able to work through the immersive experience? For example, immersing a call center agent in customer interactions, but they need to be able to use the CRM system to record their interactions.
So that's a fantastic point. So I think there again, we're starting to think about the distinction between what happens in the real world versus what happens in most training courses. So yes, you could, knowing that was a prerequisite, you would get an experienced agent to sit with that person and just go, hey, this is how the CRM works. You won't have the context yet till you go into your simulation, but this is the flow of information we need, and this is why we capture it this way, and so on and so forth. And they may not have massively sort of absorbed that until they then get in the room and go, now I remember the CRM needs this panic button to be activated, or escalation part, or whatever it might be. So I think you can again divorce the technical know-how from the immersion to give you more time to play the real scenario out, and that's where experts and esteemed colleagues would come into bear. I mean, the phrase that I've often heard is sitting with Nelly. Somebody who really knows it really well. That still has a lot to do with successful transfer of learning in the workplace. So I'd kind of engineer it to some of that.
Very nice. We've got another question from Paul. He wants to know if there are any topics where the simulation wouldn't work.
Yeah, so so I think we would start a simulation by knowing that there is a predicted outcome. And so I would say, if you've never experienced something before, how could you construct that? I mean, that's imagination. That's almost pure fiction. I think you could use it as a discovery exercise, that if something happened at a certain time, we've seen something like this. So a simulation of the nearest thing would help us at least get some of the fast traction on problem solving. But you wouldn't want to use it as a learning tool if you hadn't actually got the knowledge, the outcomes, the predictability, the safety to put people into. So I would avoid it if there isn't a precedent, if there isn't the expertise, the experience, or a situation that you could unpack, to DNA level, reconstruct as a simulation. I'd avoid that, because I think you just want to do a discovery session or a kind of, imagination thing. But yeah, I'd avoid that.
So, like on a similar thread to that, how do you control what is learned in a simulation? Can you control what is learned in a simulation?
Now that's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because so I've done lecturing, I've done coaching, I've done learning design, I've done pretty much every pathway there is to learn. And where I found the simulation route to have a little added stimulus is that you have that predicted outcome. You have that by the end of this, people will have experienced as near to real as possible of this situation, and they should be expected to be able to do da 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 da, and you can list those outcomes. But I think what I would love to think and have experienced actually is that simulations like this also reveal a whole ton of other things that the individual, if you started the process by saying, what do you want to get out of it? They'd give you a list. And at the end of it, it'd be a list 3x. It'd be 3 times as big. Because like, I didn't know that. I didn't know I panicked about that situation. And so I think you reveal a whole raft of extra dimensions on learning that people would find out. And I think it's great to capture those. So I think your outcomes, you can start with their aspirations and perhaps some of their concerns and I guess rankings on things like confidence and that sort of thing. And then test that afterwards, like saying, how confident do you feel now? If you are dealing with the most irate customer in the world, they can say, well, actually, having gone through that, which was painful and I almost cried, bring it on. You know what I mean? You could have a real strong sense that they feel comfortable. Yeah.
Now we've got a question in from Catherine. She wants to know, is there a maximum number that you should have in a group?
Yeah, so I think, again, when we decide on things like training courses, we often think, well, how many people can a facilitator handle in terms of, exercises and questions and that sort of thing. And I think a fairly similar rule would apply to a simulation. But I've worked in environments where I've kind of simulated the real world, and I've had about 25, 35. I've even had about 70 or 80 in the room. And that's really tough for one person to do. And that was in a very compressed time. So I think I would go along the sort of rule of thumb that if you've got 16, that's a pretty nice number to then divide people into smaller groups to learn in that way, or isolate them and have them work on a solo fashion without it looking weird, and you've got to have too much divergence from it. So I would think 16 is a pretty good number. Any more than that, and I think with one facilitator it could get very chaotic. But I dare say if you've got a few facilitators who can then almost like apportion themselves to look after certain groups or people, I suspect you could probably go up to 30 and maybe even bigger. But my suspicion is a simulation is probably so intense you would want to keep it on the low side.
We've got an interesting question come in from Emily. She wants to know if you've seen it used to job swap. For example, getting the senior leaders to take on a call center simulation and a call center agent to take on a pandemic crisis simulation. Would it work?
Well, so I think my short answer to that, I'd love to see that happen, because I can remember programs like Back to the Floor where CEOs would go almost like undercover boss type scenarios, and they'd learned so much by doing so and change things quite rapidly as a result of it. I really don't see any harm if you're creating a safe environment where actually, let's remind ourselves, it's not real, but we would feel it's real. I'd love to think that was a great way to connect people to different understandings of how intense certain situations can be, because I've been in boardrooms and I've been in executive teams who are talking about call center agents as an example. They have no idea how frenetic and frantic and deeply disturbing sometimes their calls can be. And so they look at them as commodities and say, oh, well, if they don't like it, they can leave. And it's like, if you sat there for a good period of time and you had a simulation experience of some of this, you would think very, very differently about your employee value proposition. So I don't think this is just about learning and skill and confidence. I think this is about kind of business recalibration at times. And if a simulation can get your execs to be more empathetic with the cause, yeah, do it. And of course, we always say, oh, they up top, they don't know what's going on. They make all these decisions and they don't have a clue. Well, put yourself in their shoes then, see how you get on. And then simulation, they might have a lot of respect for their leaders. So I think it'll have a great way to create bonds and engagement that we don't even, kind of think about right now.
It'll probably also open up the top-down and bottom-up communication within the company if you've got more mixing of the different hierarchical levels.
Definitely, and I mean, I don't want to give you the impression that you stop work and all you do is simulate, because there's kind of real stuff to do. But I think there are so many situations where we try and react to a new product line, let's say, and we try and do this run up with a training course and we think that's going to get everybody ready. And I know for a fact, because I've seen it and I've heard people tell me about it, there's a dip. Once the go live button is pressed, there's a dip because people are still finding their way through it. So why not get a few customers in, simulate what their reaction is going to be to this new product, and then use that to skill your people. You won't get that dip in productivity, then you just get this climb. So again, it doesn't have to be this adjunct or this post-crisis evaluation. It can be preemptive, because you can kind of create a real world situation as much as you want. And I think if you're spending a lot of time doing training courses, you could spend better time doing simulations.
So we've got some questions in, and one of them is tips on how to prepare successful simulation. And there's a follow-up to that, but I'll keep it at that for now.
I can see the follow-up as well, but so tips to prepare a realistic a simulation. The first one, I've just given it away, is it has to be realistic. This is not time for fantasizing. This is about things that are utterly relevant to the people and the business. And I think if you were then to say to an exec or a middle manager or somebody dealing with customers directly, tell me about the 3 things that you have found out that you wish you knew when you started or that are currently taxing you, and you'll get some. And then you can do some diagnostics, and then you can look at experiences, and then I think you can create the simulation from that. So realism, relevance, pragmatism, incredibly important starting point. And then I think what you do is you have to create some parameters. You have to say, how far should we go with this? Because you could try and recreate the whole customer value chain. It's like, not really. We just need this entry point so that when we get the first query, we are doing the right things to diffuse a situation, to calm a situation, and to get to the point where we then know what to do. Just simulate that. I think you should also then start to think in your design to not make it too easy for people. So you have to throw in some curveballs. You have to get a few people to say, well, it looks really good, they're getting on really well, now let's throw this in the mix. And then people kind of go, oh my goodness, I didn't expect that, what do I do now? And then as long as you can help them understand the method to overcome that process, those curveballs are going to be really, really useful when the real world starts throwing them at people. I'd say make it dialogic. Make it so that people are not in like a test condition. Make it so it's real, so people can talk to each other and go, do you know what, I'm really thinking that this issue is a red herring and I think we should ask this question. And then the group go, do you know what, yeah, I'm now thinking the same thing, let's do it. And then they come back out, ask the question, and lo and behold, it's a good one. So I think group collaborative dialogic approaches, I think, are really important to this, and you should build them into the journey so that you give people a punctuated sort of sense of the real world, that that's what they do if they were facing this right now. And have the ability to rewind and replay within it. So if it goes a bit wrong, people kind of go, oh no, I've just lost the company £10,000, and go, okay, let's rewind to the point where you think it could be rescued. And then they do that. And then you say, let's play the simulation again. And then you follow the pathway and you go, look at that, you've just gained a customer. So I think those are the components. Realistic, set your parameters, and that includes the numbers and the time frame. Throw in the curveballs, allow dialogic exchange, that's vital. And I think then rewind and replay so people don't feel like they failed the test, but they get a chance to play it again.
There's a couple of questions that have come in. I'll stick to them in order. So Susan's asked about budget.
Okay, cool.
Lines with setting up the simulation. So parts of it are going to be easy to manage, conversation for free. But what sort of budget are we looking at for running simulations?
I've seen simulations that run quite literally in a room with people. So, of course, in the world we're in now, we talk about some digital space, and all they've got access to is pens, post-it notes and wall space and stuff, and that's all they've done. So they obviously don't do a full board paper in the simulation, but they would sketch out the headlines on a flip chart. So I think you take some shortcuts, and I think that's where this is kind of budget agnostic, if anything, because I suspect it is no more costly in terms of operating it than it would be to run a training course. You just change the dynamic of how you put it together. It might need a little bit more upfront design, because I think you have to play with more complexity. So you could say that you would have to invest a little bit more before you let it out and get people to play with it. But I think you can do these quite lo-fi. I don't think you need to invest lots in, you know, technological tools or, you know, complex scenarios and bring actors in. I've seen some good simulations with actors in, but I don't think you have to have them. I think I've found in most companies, even smaller ones, there's some people there with a good little bit of thespian skill that you can say, pretend you're an irate customer, and they can do that. And we surprise ourselves actually at how we can step into other roles and it can be realistic. So I think rely on almost like street theatre rather than Broadway production.
Then one of the questions that have come in from Julia, what are some of the typical resistances to simulation and how are they best dealt with?
So I think people worry it is going to be too complex. And so, I mean, it's kind of ironic really, because it's like, well, if you think it's complex to recreate it, think how complex it is in the real world without the right skill behind it. So it's an argument that will get put to you. And if you're talking about, look, I want to take 16 people away for a day, people are like, oof, that's a bit expensive. But if you booked a meeting with them to just talk about the budget and that lasted about 5 hours, they wouldn't bat an eyelid. So I mean, I think there's a case to make about the fact that resistance is often about time, effort, complexity, and those sort of things. And I think your key to unlocking that is to try a small but very powerful simulation that only lasts a small amount of time and is very much illustrative. And then say to people, now look at the difference in people's confidence and competence here and the productivity uptick that could realize. You'll get people resisting a lot less once you do that. So experiment small but powerfully, I think, is how I'd answer that one.
Then Nadia, I'm going to come back to your question because it is something on our agenda today. I'm going to skip to David's. So David's asked, what role will augmented reality play?
Oh, you see, now that's lovely. So I would say that if you have got budget, and if you have got some incredibly good, complex issues to tackle and some great experiences and some super designers, I think augmented reality could be phenomenal in that kind of situation. So what we're talking about there is not a virtual immersion in a headset, but things in a place can be constructed to act as if they were part of the real world. So I know for a fact some learning that's done in aerospace engineering uses a projected kind of thing that's worn around the neck to put on the engine part so people know what things to do. So I think that could be incredible. That could be so powerful, it's unreal. But of course you would need a huge budget. But I suspect some of the bigger companies in the military are probably way ahead in that one anyway. And let's say flight simulators are a classic example. I mean, nobody's let into a plane before they've even tried it on a simulator. So it's that kind of tech I think would be really, really helpful. So I'd give a big thumbs up to augmented reality if you can afford it. Yeah.
Then Elizabeth's asked, what are some of your favorite questions to stimulate collaboration and creative thinking in simulations?
Ah, nice one. So yeah, so I think there's two favorite questions of mine. One is, we've never been able to crack it, right? And so that's the issue, that people have pulled a few threads on and have shaped it a little bit, but the issue itself is still a rolling, lumbering, not at all solved dilemma. And that could be things like, you know, a bad culture in a company, or some toxic leadership, or really unhelpful behaviors and stuff, and people will say we've not cracked it. Now simulating things like that can be pretty difficult, but I think you can again track back and think, what is the damage that this culture creates, and simulate where that culture creates the damage. And then I think you might get some people going, oh my goodness, is that what we do? There is a really strange concept, but it's really effective. It's called social clowning, and what happens is some actors go into a management scenario and they watch a board meeting, and then they take all this information in and they act it out as if it were a clowning scenario. And apparently it drops people's thoughts to like, oh my God, do we do that? Are we that stupid? So I think you could do that. I think that's one question I love. What's the sticky stuff that we haven't been able to unstick? And then I think the other question I really like is where people say something along the lines of, we just won't have the time to invest in that. Do you know what I mean? That kind of scenario. So people people who keep pushing those things to the side, saying, no, we won't worry about our employer brand because actually we just haven't got time to do that. And I think when you can simulate something that then helps people understand where the damage might come from with the employer brand, or where the reputational enhancement might come from, that gets them starting to think differently too. So we haven't got time for it, and it's never been solved up to now. They're my two favourite questions where simulation has a really nice part to play in helping resolve those.
One of my questions that often come up in other brain food meetings we've had is pretty much a swear word in L&D. It's return on investment. So
okay,
what are your thoughts on measuring the return of investment of simulated learning scenarios?
Okay, I'll just get over my reaction to that. So the term itself is not, it's not a corruptible thing, is it? I mean, it's sensible to say to people, if we're going to put something into this, what are we going to get out of it? What I don't like is that those people who are suddenly alerted to that phrase almost use it like a karate chop on your idea, and I don't like that at all. But what I do like is to think about, let's talk about the impact of the investment rather than the return, because what that does is it takes our mind away from how much are we going to get back as a result of this, and it starts to say, what are we going to gain, like exponentially or forevermore as a result of this? So I talk about impact on investment. Now, I think in simulated learning, I guess there are probably some different factors we can throw into the mix here, which are about things like competence and the cost of mistakes and so on, that I think simulated learning closes the gap, right? So I've seen a simulation in a tech company, and it's kind of that their learning is so operational you don't even notice it, but they've closed the error gap on coding from days and weeks to a piece of software not working because the coding's bad to minutes, because they're simulating it in front of somebody else who can pick up errors. That stuff is worth gold. So this is the stuff I think we can say to people, the impact on investment is, and draw some new lines and add some new quotas to what they get. So it requires some clever thinking, and I guess what I would say on it is, it's not a simple, we spent this much time in a room and therefore this is what we think we're going to get in sales. I think it's a much more complex thing than that. So again, it requires some upfront thinking, and then some really detailed downloads from the participants who can then tell you now just how confident they feel, just how competent they'll be, because the learning in a simulation I found sticks so much stronger than a training course.
We've got some questions around people wanting step-by-step process through this.
Step by step.
Yeah, so I guess like how do we start it? How do we get into it? Have you got scenarios that you can tell us about that you've experienced before?
Good question. Yeah, so I think I would start by the fact that you'll find some people will get very excited about the thought of running a simulation. So that's what we've done as a tactic. We've gone into an organization where this is probably going to be part of the solution, and we said, look, what about this? And they're like, yeah, let's do it. And our starting point is not who's the most competent or who's the learning professional or whatever it is. It's like, who would want to do this most? And we work with that energy and intent. So we start with that. We say, who wants to come in? And then we work with those people who are already psychologically committed to trying to make this work. We deliberately try and bring in some, I guess I'd say, critical friends down the line, but we want to get it going. So we bring those in first. Then we start to identify what's the thing that's achievable as our starting point in that small experimental version of this, and run that with those people. Now, they're going to be favorable to it because they wanted to be there, but also they will probably want to throw a pretty tough challenge into a small time frame. And so, yeah, we don't shy away from complexity in it, and we give it a good go. And then when the thing is successful, because we might have a few iterations of it, but that's what I do is play with it, learn from it, and maybe play with it again so it's a bit more refined and tighter. Those people go out and start to viralize this stuff and say to people, right, I found the new way to do things, this is what it is, and they start to share it. So your I guess you'd say sort of rollout strategy is often quite organic and human because people who experience it are the best advocates for it. And then I think we're about to create something. I'll embellish it a little bit here. Instead of learning facilitators, business reinvention lab technicians. That's what I think they become, right? Because they're not just teaching people stuff. They are trying to reinvent the business they're operating in to solve problems and give people these new skills and confidences. So they're way more than trainers and facilitators. They are quite literally lab technicians. They're running that space. They're helping people learn. And so I get those people to be the core of how you then replicate this and get more of it, whilst keeping learning professionals and people who know how to construct those kind of scenarios and the experts in the mix as well. So find the energy, start small, learn, roll out, problems always at the heart of it, and then that impact on investment thing I think we just talked about.
Have you come across anybody already doing this successfully?
Not that many people actually. So I don't think there'll be many people who put their hand up and say, we have abandoned training courses and we fully operate now with learning simulations. I just don't think that's even entered the lexicon yet. However, Royal Dutch Shell are doing some terrific, immersive digital simulations, absolutely top drawer. ING Bank over in the Netherlands are doing some incredibly good real-time agile-based simulations and learning. So I'm seeing that happen quite a lot. And our clients really, I guess, who come to us for, I guess, some business problems to be solved, we use this technique with them. So Salford City Council is my favourite example, who have just gone so far down the line with this kind of simulated environment. They wouldn't even call it that. They call it squad working, and it's about innovation and stuff. But really, they're teaching people, they're helping rehearse scenarios, and they're letting loose new products and inventions. So they're doing it pretty strongly too. And I've seen some good stuff from Veolia, the sort of water and refuse company. So their examples are out there. And I think it's so much better than just relying on either video or e-learning or training courses, because these are almost like the peak learning experiences. So the other things still have a part to play. I don't want people to think they've got to throw their training stuff out the window. This is almost like when we really need the hottest, most optimal stuff, this is when we play this card.
I know it's used, and it's been used for many years in the medical field already as part of their training, and it's a nice add-on, especially for surgeons or anybody involved in the environment.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I wouldn't fancy them having just read it out of a textbook and then get a scalpel out. No.
Yeah, all right, I just want to check. I think yes. Okay, so there's no more questions in the chat group. I want to find out from you where you think the future of simulated learning is going in LND.
Yeah, I could talk about it in a couple of ways, really. And one is actually answering directly this budget question, because again, what really sparked me into the thinking about simulations was an experience I had in 2012 when I walked into a university, and it was an alternative university set up by students in Bucharest in Romania. And they were recreating or simulating an experience of somebody who had signed up to be an aid worker, arriving in a war-torn country. And literally they said, right, you've stepped off the plane. What do you do now? And in the room were several people who'd done this before. And so this person had to then go, well, I'm sure I'm going to be met by somebody. And it's like, okay, so how would that look? And so it was an incredible experience. And it was just a flip chart and 6 people sat round and other people watching and observing, a bit like a fishbowl scenario. So I think, you know, in a very quick way, if you've got the expertise, you can say, right, we don't need to even design this thing. Let's just do a simulation on the fly. So I think we'll start to see that coming in as a little bit more of a rapid solution, if that makes sense. Then I think we can start thinking about some of the stuff we do when we teach people coaching skills, as an example. And we often create situations where, you know, you've got, I suppose, some questions and you've got some scenarios, and they're probably quite immersive and they're probably quite simulation-like. But he said about how you could create that as a much more real life experience with a build up to it. And so it doesn't feel like a training course. I can see that coming in quite significantly. And I think you can then capitalize on things like when people huddle up about doing some work of a day and people kind of say, yeah, we've got this challenge to do, this project's getting really tricky, we don't know what to do about this particular tricky user. So you can then say, well, okay, well, why don't we simulate that conversation then, because I know that user like really well, so therefore I'll be them and let's simulate it. And I can see it becoming a quite easy to deploy thing. So I don't want to give the impression that everybody has to create a lab. but I think you can almost have like pop-up simulations. I think that's where we'll see learning professionals start to really, really help in the moment. Again, learning in the flow of work. Josh Burson, yeah.
Nadia says that the health and safety team have done great work, but they struggle to change behavior still. Have you got any examples focusing on areas in health and safety?
Yeah, so the Royal Dutch Shell immersive environment I talked about is all about working on an oil refinery and being safe. And I've done some work in the energy sector where there are, again, some slightly more immersive versions of how they teach people. They're still part of a training course, but they are still a little bit more like this. So I think the short answer to it is I haven't seen that many. The long answer is I think some of them are in disguise and they're hidden in a training course. What I'd say is kind of pull them out a bit, because I think those are the more powerful things that can change behaviours. And I know that the Nudge Unit and Number 10's behavioural economics team are obviously trying to predict how people work. And so they are using models and scenarios and so my suspicion is there are lots of examples, but they're kind of hidden. So I'm going to go and try and find some more.
Then Sarah's asked if you are aware of any example recordings of simulated learning experiences that we could have a look at?
Gosh, that's good. Short answer is no. Long answer is I think if we're trying to get people excited about it, this absolutely should be part of it. So yeah, I'm going to take that one away, because I suspect some of those people I've talked to have got some like promotional kind of collateral that supports this, but I don't know of any, and I don't know how entertaining they would be, but my guess is they would be quite revealing for people. So I'll take that one away and have a look.
Cool, thank you. Right, let me just check the chat. I've answered everyone's questions there. So I want to know, how do we get started taking advantage of this? I mean, some of us have got time on our hands at the moment with the isolation, running face-to-face training courses anymore. So how do we get going?
So I think obviously there are still a whole ton of unknowns in the world we're in right now. So you probably couldn't simulate some of this stuff because it's new ground for a lot of people. So it might be a chance to revert to some of those things you've always wanted to tackle but haven't quite had the time and the inclination. So I'd find your issue and I'd say try and keep it to perhaps something that would be very helpful when we're out of this lockdown. So something that you've always wanted to, I don't know, create a much more immersive graduate experience. So you're like, okay, well, let's simulate what a grad is actually going through now, and what that could lead us to perhaps in a design experience at the other end. So find the scenario. Find the expert too. So when you're simulating, the most critical thing is you've got somebody who's got a lot up here and a lot of experience to help you with the modeling side of things, because you want to create that predicted outcome so that people go, I did it right. It's like, yeah, there is a right outcome. There's probably a few variations of success, complete success and minor success, or complete failure and minor failure. And the expert will be able to help you understand what they are. So find the problem, find the expert, and then I think start to design something where it's like, how would we simulate this? What would be the stages, the challenges, the curveballs I talked about earlier on, and use that. And in fact, the whole design process of this in and of itself is almost like an immersive simulated experience, but you want to get to the end of it with something that's tangible and worth it, that people can kind of pin their competence and confidence to, and say, now through this experience, I haven't just been told things or just sketched them out. I've actually lived them. I felt them. And perhaps the most extreme version of this I heard about was a few years ago. It's a concept called a living museum. And the concept is called a mile in their shoes. And what happens is there are a pair of shoes available for a migrant worker, a sex worker, somebody in domestic violence situation, whatever it is. And you put those shoes on and you walk in those shoes with headphones, and they are telling you their story of their life. Now, I've seen people break down and cry and get so immersed in their world that you can't tell me they haven't learned something about that person's situation. I don't think you have to do it that extreme in terms of psychological impact, but even just narrated dialogue stuff is pretty powerful when you're trying to create a simulation. Everybody can record that on the phone. So you can mock up the calls, you know, that kind of thing. So I think there's definitely something about getting something in mind, playing with it, trying it out, and seeing what happens at the other end in terms of learning outcomes. And I noticed a comment in there about the agile stuff. Yeah, we do a lot of simulations with agile. We teach people agile by giving them real problems to solve, and we simulate what it would be like when they leave that room. I've seen people solve problems or get to the first stage of solving a problem within half a day, and it was stuff they didn't think they had the answers or stuff in terms of outcomes as well.
Yeah, there's definitely power in tapping into the people asset in companies and organizations for solving problems we don't think we have answers to. Emily's asked if there's any free resources you have that we can steal with pride to help us get started.
That's a really good thing. So my guess is if you Google search stuff like, and I noticed Hayden put that in about military and some of the simulations that they've done, then I'm sure you'll find some examples of how it's done there. And I guess that's probably, again, on a grand high investment scale. But I think we're so early to this, I don't think there are that many templates. The only thing I will say is there's a series of facilitation tools that aren't necessarily about simulation, but they end up getting used in simulated environments. And it's a website called Liberating Structures. So it's liberatingstructures.org. And it's about 20-25 facilitation tools. The only reason I say they're useful is because in simulations, sometimes what you want to do is create a situation where people have a frame to work in, give them that, and it can help as part of the simulation. So I would say there are tools out there that you can use within the simulation, but I don't think there's a kind of, cut out and keep guide for them yet. But it's something I'm working on, and it's something I'm sort of seriously thinking should come out sooner rather than later in the world we're in. So watch this space on things coming from me.
Very nice. How do people get in contact with you to be able to watch this space?
So I'm on Twitter at Perry Timms. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not that difficult to find on there. I've got a website, pthr.co.uk. Any of those channels, or email me, perry@pthr.co.uk. And I'm always happy to talk to people about this. I mean, this is something where I think if people want to play with it, this is not about consulting, this is just about helping you get started. So I'd love to see more people playing with simulations and coming out the other end and kind of going, right, I've got the answer now. I know where my training courses and my coaching and my e-learning sits, and I know where this sits now. I think it's part of, not the answer, but I think it could be the most enriching learning experience we've delivered in the workplace for a while. So I'd love to see us go quite max on this. I'm
not sure if everybody's aware, but if you have a look in the group chat, Sam has shared a link of an online immersive simulation, LifeSaving.uk. Helen has also spoken about Daniel. I'm not going to attempt that surname.
Liebeskind. Yeah, Liebeskind, yeah.
So a great example of immersing people into a situation with his Jewish museums and how he purposefully designs them to make you feel uneasy. That should be interesting. So yeah, there's some things that we can start looking at today. So yeah, I'd like to thank you, Perry, for your time today and for all your wisdom.
Thank you.
It's been very interesting and entertaining for all of us today, and a nice break from the coronavirus hostage situation we find ourselves in at the moment.
We kind of simulated a different world there, didn't we?
We did.
Nice one. Thank you. And thanks to everybody for the questions. They were great, really challenging, really good.
Great, thank you. I'd just like to invite everybody to our Brain Food community. We are very aware that people are going to feel a little bit isolated during this time, and part of the community has been about networking. So we've decided that every Wednesday at 10 o'clock, we will be online using Zoom, and you can check in. You'll be unmuted for that. We can just have a chat and discuss and maybe talk about simulated learning a little bit more, or any other questions or challenges you're having during this time to keep you going. So watch our LinkedIn, that's Brain Food Community on LinkedIn, to see the Zoom information for that. Great, thank you everybody. I hope you all stay healthy and well, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Ciao for
Thanks,
now.
Jen. Thanks, Perry. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone, for being on the call and for all your questions today. As Jen said, check out Brain Food Community in LinkedIn if you're not already following us on there. Everything we do is always posted on there. We post quite regularly. We're also sharing lots of content and information as well. We'll send the recording out afterwards today, so you can get hold of that. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, and we'll have a bit of a hangout and just, connect in these times of social distancing. So have a wonderful rest of the day, guys. Maybe get outside and have your one run of the day or one walk of the day, and enjoy as best we can the environment we're in. So thanks very much for everybody's time this morning, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
It's really good, actually.